talking about M3, which means mindset, motivation, and metacognition. If you don't know what that means yet, don't worry, we're going to be talking about it. So I'm Clara. I'm a senior at Hazen Union High School.
I'm James Tedesco. I'm also a senior at Hazen Union.
Okay, so we're going to get started with this first session. And also you should know anything that we have as a handout that you'll need for these sessions is in this packet. And also that the slides we're using today up here to teach to you are the exact same ones that you're going to be using when you teach this. So it mirrors really well. And so this also lines up with your guide and your packet. All right, so let's get started.
So over what would theoretically be the course of like 6 weeks, 6 different individualized lesson packets, we are going to be talking about how your brain learns, strategies about learning, what it means to stereotype yourself and others into these boxes which become restraints. We're just going to be talking about the way your brain learns in a nutshell. Now, finger tapping challenge. There's an activity it would be cool if you guys would try, where what you do is you take your thumb and your index finger and you tap this way, but then with your opposite hand, you move in the other direction. So, like that.
So you're trying to simultaneously move in 2 different directions. So on one hand, you're starting from your index finger, moving to your pinky. On the other hand, you're starting from your pinky, moving to your index finger at the same time.
Just be really deliberate.
Okay, give that a try.
I feel like those are my favorite.
You start over at the starting point every time.
I can't go back to start. I can't go back.
It looks like you guys have all had an opportunity to try the finger tapping challenge. What were some initial reactions?
Difficult.
Difficult, yeah. I can relate to that. Anyone else? Any thoughts that were going through your head as you were trying to work through it?
It feels weird trying to do it. It messes with my brain.
Yeah. Were you raising your hand?
Yeah. So if you kind of put your hands like this, I mean, I still couldn't really do it, but it makes it easier and you just do it in one direction.
Yeah. And that comes down to a learned understanding of movement, and it really challenges us to think about doing it in opposite directions. This is hard at first, but as you do it again and again, as there begins this pattern of repetition appears, it'll become easier over time, and that's kind of a lot of the root of what our work comes down to.
Yeah. So you brought up a really good point about you came up with a strategy all on your own, where you faced this hard problem and realized that if you approached it in a really logical way and in a really specific way, you can make it a little bit easier for yourself by coming up with a method, which is really awesome. So that's a really great segue. A lot of what we're talking about, so the metacognition part, that's a really big word. What it means, meta is thinking about, and cognition is thinking. So it's thinking about thinking, right? So it's understanding how we learn and how our brain works. And so part of that is understanding what are some things that we can do to learn better and to face hard problems. So that's a really great example of coming up with a way to work through a problem when you're faced with one. So this is something that we just talked about. When you first faced this, you had some different reactions. So some people said it was difficult. Some people, there was a hint that if you approached it in a really different way and understand how you learn better, it could be a little bit easier. But everything that's going through your mind as you face a hard problem is what we call self-talk. So that's what are you saying to yourself? Are you saying, I can't do this, I'm giving up? Are you saying, oh, this is kind of difficult, it's kind of weird, it kind of hurts my brain, but I'm going to keep going and practicing? So a lot of what we're doing actually is talking about things that you already do. So whenever you're faced with a hard problem, you already talk to yourself, and you have that script in your mind where you work through a problem in a really specific way. And so a lot of what this is just recognizing that when it happens. So how this applies to your learning. If we think about learning as driving a car, if you're along for the ride, you're in the passenger seat, you're just doing it passively, maybe you do the work and you just sit there and absorb the information. that can work for some people in some situations, but what this is really about is understanding how you learn and understanding how you learn in all different kinds of situations, whether that's in school or on the soccer field or in any other kind of situation. And it's about knowing so much about how you learn that you're able to actually take control of your learning and say, this is what I need to do to learn well, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't, this is what's stopping me from learning. So it's about really taking charge of your own learning, which is really, really wonderful and really important, because once you start to do this, it's something you can do throughout your whole life, and it gives you a lot of control over your life. So we're going to watch this short video about neuroplasticity, which we'll explain, but it's just understanding a little bit about how our brain works and why self-talk and how we face challenges matters.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Why don't you take about 2 minutes now to turn to someone or a few people near you, unpack this video a little bit, and specifically talk about how does it relate to the finger tapping challenge that we just did. So try to make those clear.
But Nick, when you kept practicing, what happened in your brain? It got a stronger pathway because you practiced.
And if you don't try, the pathway will just stay safe and stuff.
So when people say, I can't do this, I give up, you're never going to give up those things.
So, what are some things we came up with? What did you take away from that video, and could you find any connections between neuroplasticity and the activity that we just did? Yeah.
Like you can like if you're doing it, like you're not used to it, but you can force your brain to get used to it by using neuroplasticity.
And that's also why it would get easier over time, right? So like as you create that pathway and use it more, the reaction becomes quicker. So it's a much easier place for your brain to go, which is why if you keep doing it, it'll get much easier. Thank you. Yeah.
Like the way that you normally do it when you have like the same fingers going at the same time is like the first pathway, and then this like the new way is like the second pathway. We're just kind of carving.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it feels so weird, right? Because it's something that you're not used to, because it's like you're about to make the turn you always take, and then suddenly you go in a whole different direction. Yeah. What over here? What do we talk about over here?
And if you don't practice, that pathway will close up or just not grow.
Right, yeah, so if you never did this, it would probably always feel as hard as it did the first time, right? Because you never sort of changed that pathway. Exactly. Cool. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, sort of in the same theme of like self-talk and understanding how you approach problems and sort of where your mind goes when you're about to approach a problem. Identify one challenge in your life. So there are a few empty pages at the back of your participant packet that you can use to write. So write down what's something in your life that's sort of hard for you, where you face a challenge. And then really think about your self-talk as this happens, right? So like, if you approach a math problem that's really hard and you're like, wow, we never learned this in class, I don't know what I'm doing. What are you saying to yourself in those moments? You know, like where is your mind going? What are you telling yourself about whether or not you can do this? Okay. So take a few minutes to look at that.
Like what's your usual?
And also these aren't going to be public. This isn't anything we're going to share or anything. So if it's a sort of a personal challenge, that's okay. This is just for you. This is just about understanding how this applies to your own life.
It's the emotional part of
Okay, so what's going on in your head? Are you saying, this is stupid, I like it the other way? Or are you saying, I gotta figure this out? How do you go about it?
So the next step to this, as you start to identify some of that self-talk, is if it's negative self-talk, if it's something where it's like, wow, I can't do this, I'm not going to try, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not capable enough, or if we're still going with the math problem example, I'm just not a math person, right? So if it's something like that, try rewriting it. So what would that self-talk script look like if you were saying, okay, maybe this isn't easy, but I'll get it eventually, right? So how would that change? How would the way that you're talking to yourself change? So if you're having trouble thinking about what this is or what this looks like, so I use the math example, and that one is one that I think a lot of people face, but that's also pretty personal to me. So I'm taking an AP Calculus class this year, which is very hard, and a lot of the work we do isn't something that we've necessarily gone over exactly in class, so it's not just like plugging in the numbers into something you know how to do. It's a lot of problem solving. And it's a lot of understanding how you can apply things you already learned. And so one of the biggest things that I've had to learn this year is instead of looking at a problem and saying, wow, I really can't do this, I have no idea, I never learned this, it's about taking steps to say, okay, I trust the teacher who assigned this, I know that this is something that I can do, I know this is something that I have the tools to do. It's about thinking in a different way and in a way I'm not used to, and applying all of the things I already know and getting help and asking questions when I need it. Right? So it's moving away from that, I have no idea how to do this kind of a self-talk script to, okay, this has to be a process. This is something I have to work through, and there are the support systems there for me to get help when or if I need it. Okay, so just take maybe 1 minute to finish this up.
Okay, so wrapping up on that last activity, in your participant packet, which you will also have to hand out to your peers when you're facilitating, you should have a sheet that says neurons that fire together wire together. Kind of looks like this, kind of looks like that. In a nutshell, this graphic is kind of depicting how when you repeatedly work at something, when you tackle the finger tapping challenge time and time again, when you strengthen that pathway because of the neuroplasticity, you can get good at something. And a really easy to relate to example of that is learning how to ride a bike, because it's what kids do. And as these nerve fibers begin to bond and become stronger over time, just the pattern of doing that behavior becomes easier. And yeah. So we have an activity that is super funky. So the activity is, what's it called?
We are the brain.
We are the brain. The cool thing about this activity is we're going to use every single person in this room. So I wrote it all down on my arm because I can never remember the words. So your hand is the cell body. being like all of the nerves in the brain. So if your hand is the cell body, your fingers are the dendrites, and then you have your arm as the axons, and your elbow is the synapse.
The synapse is the space between right here, this, synapse.
The learn in space.
So this is like, scientifically, this is what's happening when you're learning new things. So the way your brain works, as you make connections and as you think, it's like an electrical signal jumping over this synapse. And so the reason that things get easier is that jump becomes easier and it becomes faster every time you do it. So that's why neuroplasticity exists, and that's why it works, and that's why practice actually changes your ability to do things quickly and effectively.
So in order to demonstrate this effect, if everyone could stand up and make a big circle over here. However a circle can be made.
Maybe they can make a circle around each of their respective tables.
Ooh, yeah.
Two brains.
Leave enough room so that when your arms are like this, you're connected around. So you have to create a little bit of space so that you can create your neuron.
So we're going to be modeling sort of this action in action. So we're going to be modeling what happens when you send signals around your brain and when you're thinking in a certain way. So your hands are going to look like this, right? Because you're becoming these parts of the brain. Yes, you should all be going in the same direction. There you go, you got it. And you're going to be passing a word around, right? And so that word is going to be yet, as in, I can't do this yet, right? So one person is going to say it and go like this, and then the next person is going to take that and say it, and they're going to go around. And try that once, see how fast you can go.
And only when they say it do they start mobilizing their dendrites. That's what's going to start the wave of the hands in motion, send the yet around.
Right. So you're just going to send the yet. So I might say, I don't know how to fly a plane yet.
You got it. You're in on this.
Oh.
You say yet.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So one person gets to start, and then we'll do a couple of rounds like that.
Yeah.
We'll start. Will.
We'll start over here.
I don't know how to not limp yet.
Okay, that was pretty good.
Okay, how about now someone
Now we're
else
gonna
does it? So
run
who
it
else
all
has
again.
Who's gonna
Be
start?
like really poised.
Bailey.
We're doing this as fast as we can. Okay, who wants to kick it off this time? It's you. You got it.
I don't know how to
You got one?
Did anyone notice like the change between the
right
first
now
time
we're
and the
one
last
big
time?
brain
we did
modeling
this?
how everyone's brain works.
Yeah, it was significantly faster. It's very like, metacognitive for thinking about this.
Over here.
Our literal brain made this figurative brain work quickly. Anyway, yeah.
So you want to take your seats again? This is something you can think about when you face a problem, right? So remember this activity. Remember that like the first time you're probably not going to understand exactly what you're doing, and it may be a little bit awkward and a little bit slow, but as you keep going, it'll get faster. So like you could even, if you wanted to remind yourself when you face a problem, maybe do this a little bit, right? Like remind yourself like, okay, this is hard and this is weird, but it's going to get faster, it's going to get better. I'm going to be able to do this easier next time. So we are going to wrap up this session with a video. And I think this guy pretty much speaks for himself.
I feel.
Do you feel alive?
I feel happy of myself.
I feel happy of yourself too. What do you got? Any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them?
Everybody, I know you can believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. If you don't, you just keep practicing. You will get the hang of it, I know it. If you keep practicing, you will get the hang of it, and then you can get better and better at it as you do it.
Give me some thumbs up.
Thumbs up, everybody!
All right.
For rock and roll!
So that was just a fun way to wrap up this session, and to remember, sort of bring together all the things we've been talking about, right? So Neuroplasticity, our minds can change, the way we think, the way we act, the things that are easier to us, our habits can change, and we have a lot of control over that, right? And we take that control by understanding how we talk to ourselves, right? And so that relates to what you're going to be doing for the challenge of the week. So when you do this in your TSAs, instead of doing a lot of these activities in 2 days, it's going to be spread out over 6 weeks, right? And so in order to sort of keep the ball rolling from week to week, there's going to be an opportunity of the week every week. So it's something that sort of you'll present to the people, to your peers, and then it's something for them to like keep in mind as they go until they do the next session. So for this week, it's to be mindful of your self-talk. So when are you in some situations where you're facing a challenge or something's hard, and really notice that negative self-talk. Notice the times when you're like, okay, there's no way I can do this, or I'm not going to try this anymore, or I'm just not a math person. You know, all of those little things that you say to yourself all the time, be aware of them, and when you hear yourself saying that, write it down. And then take the step to rewrite it. Say, okay, if I was going to do this differently, and if I was going to do this in a positive way, in a way that would help me grow, what would I be saying to myself, right? And so this is sort of a way to understand and notice self-talk, but this is also neuroplasticity in action, right? So like you're building your own habits. You're training yourself to recognize when you're stopping yourself by saying negative things and reframe that.